I'm very glad to present another neighbor, Agnieszka from Poland, and she will tell about PR magic.
That is right. Hello, everybody. I have to admit I'm kind of surprised that there's so much of you here. I didn't expect that. Hey! It's so good to see you, though, and thank you for showing up. I guess if you guys are here, then probably you do know a little bit about myself, but just to give you a bigger picture, and to tell you who am I. Well, privately, actually, I'm a huge Metallica fan, and this is a picture of myself. I've done like 32 live shows so far and been following the band all over the world. But since we're not here to discuss rock shows, sadly, and we're about to talk about PR, then probably you would like to know more about my professional experience in the field. Well, over the past couple of years, I was working as a PR specialist for CD Projekt RED, working in the brands such as The Witcher and Cyberpunk 2077. Eventually, I decided to move on and started my own PR company, which is called PR Outreach. And at this point, we're focusing on supporting independent developers mostly with their efforts to promote their game. Now, these are only a couple of titles that we've been either working on in the past or we still work on them. And if I was to name one question that I get asked the most when some team approaches me and asking for help, that would be, what's the right time to start my PR campaign? So when to start? When should I start to promote my game? And what's the right time to actually start talking about it? Now, the most simple answer, and at the same time the most accurate one I could give, would be start as soon as you can, as soon as possible. Actually, the moment when you start developing a game, when you start to sit and thinking about development milestones, this should be exactly the point where you start thinking about your PR campaign as well. So start to think about activities you should take, start to try to incorporate them in your plan. And if you think that the right moment to start promoting a game is at the time of its launch, it's already too late. It used to be that the average sales of indie titles on Steam was around 32,000 copies. And right now it dropped until 21,000 copies, which is 1/3 cut. So if you do want to make a revenue, if you want to be successful, this means you have to get the message out there as soon as you can. Now, another question to follow would be how to do it, right? So there are pretty much 3 things you should look after. If you're able to do the PR campaign yourself, meaning, do you have the knowledge, do you have the money, and do you have the time? I'm sorry about the money thing, but sorry, this is how this business works. At some point, you will need money to run a successful PR campaign. Now, if you do have the first and you do have the last, so you know how to do it and you have the time to do it, you should totally do it yourself. Always remember that you're the best person as a developer, you're the best person to talk about your game. But if you have only a little knowledge and you have absolutely no time to do it, but you do have some money, then you can consider hiring somebody, like a PR representative, who's gonna do it for you. But for the sake of this presentation, let's assume that you want to do the gig on your own and you want to run the whole thing by yourself. Well, then there are a couple of mistakes that you should try to avoid within the process. And the first one probably would be not to focus on the big guys so much. There's another question I get asked pretty often. So whenever I start talking with a new indie team, one of the first questions is, can you get us covered by, and put any media outlet here, GameSpot, IGN, Kotaku, Polygon. Now the thing is that indie developers are certain that getting covered by these guys gonna make that their game gonna sell, that they're gonna be successful. Well, like with anything in life, it's not that easy, sadly. And here's a case study for you to prove the point. We've been working with an Argentinian team, the studio which is called Senscape, and they were running a Kickstarter campaign for a game called The Case of Charles Dexter Ward. Now, what we did to make sure the campaign going to be successful, we approached IGN and we secured massive coverage for the game. This was the announcement news, this was the large interview that followed. And now you're probably thinking, okay, so how much money did we get out of the biggest story in the biggest gaming website in the world? Well, it brought us $400. $400 out of the massive story in the biggest gaming website in the world. Because the problem is, it's important to get your message out there, but it's also important to make sure that you have the right audience to actually receive the message, that there are people there that you're targeting right. The problem with IGN is that people who visit IGN, they don't go there to look for news about the indie game. They go there to read about AAA titles. These people usually buy 4 to 6 AAA games a year. So they might read about your game, they might even like it, but they are very unlikely to actually buy it or to support your campaign at the end of the day. This is why you should try to find a different approach. And this is what's very important for indie teams to actually start and work on building a community. Especially for independent titles, this is actually more important than getting your game covered. So what you should try to do, try to identify places where people who are fond of similar games to the one that you're creating gather. Try to identify in forums or social media channels. Go there and talk to those people, build a relationship. And what's important, try to do that before you will actually try to sell your game to them. So, for example, don't go to Reddit and don't write your first post there saying, hey, this is this cool game we're working on and maybe you could support it on Steam Greenlight or Indiegogo. Don't do that ever, because people hate that. Instead, try to be a part of the community, try to establish a relationship, try to talk with these people, exchange ideas and feedback. Eventually, you will get to a point where you can tell them about your game and you can invite them to follow you on your social media channels. You can try to kind of traffic them to your own channels, but this will take time. But it's worth it though, because you're gonna build a community that at the end of the day, they're gonna buy a game, and more importantly, they're gonna spread the word about it. And even though it does take time, it is pretty much a free thing you're gonna get. This is something you can get without any money. Now, the other thing in regards to communication, always remember that a mighty tool that you can use would be YouTube. And here's another case study that I can share with you. We are also working with a Polish team, a development company which is called Robot Gentleman. And these guys came up with a wonderful idea for an arcade game which was called 60 Seconds. And they've approached us quite some time after lunch because they were hoping that we could get the game covered on some media outlets. And we tried to do that, and actually we had a pretty rough time because we managed to get the game covered on some smaller sites, we managed to get it covered on some medium sites, but we had like a really tough time getting it covered on bigger outlets because those guys thought that the game is too casual for their hardcore audience. And yet, the game sold, and it sold really well. Until this point, it is like around 150,000 copies, and it's still selling well, even though it didn't get massive media coverage. What brought sales, though, was tons Let's Play videos. A lot of YouTubers covered it, from the smaller ones to the huge ones, like PewDiePie, including himself. And people watched those videos and decided to buy the game. Of course, you have to have like a certain game that will sell well on YouTube. So it's either should be funny, that was 60 Seconds case, or it should be full of jump scares. That was the case we had with Colette, another title we've been working on. So of course, not every game is as kind of suitable to work well with YouTube, but still, there's tons of YouTubers there, and you should be able to find somebody willing to cover your game. And this should bring actually a lot of sales if you do it right. Now, another important thing to mention. This is one of those Captain Obvious things. Right, you do know it should be good to reply to messages, but this is how independent teams quite often work. They quite often tell me, we don't have the time for that. So they don't reply to comments, they don't reply to messages they get via email, they don't interact with their community, and it's even worse when it comes to talking with media. And you have to remember that this is actually essential, especially when building media relations. And for the sake of this presentation, I've prepared a short survey, and I've sent it to my media contacts all over the world, asking them to answer a couple of questions. And over 100 of them were kind enough to do so. So I'm going to share with you a couple of questions and answers I got from them. And one of the first questions I asked was, what's the most annoying thing when they get in touch with you? So I'm, as an editor, I'm emailing you guys, developers, and asking for whatever. Now, yet again, the answer might be pretty obvious, because what pisses them off the most is either the lack of answer at all, or the delay in the fact, or on how much does it guys take you to actually send them the reply. So most of them actually expect to get the message like immediately. So if it takes you guys around a couple of weeks or a couple of days even to send a message to media, you have to deal with the fact that the coverage won't happen. They won't wait for that, they just move on, and you pretty much lose the promoting opportunity. So the question to follow would be, what exactly does it mean immediately or as soon as possible? Where most journalists that I've spoken with said that they expect to get the answer within the first 24 hours. And this is the tricky part, because you have to remember that, here's the deal, you have to develop the game, you have to figure out the PR and marketing for it, you have to build community, you have to deal with your social media channels, and also you have to provide 24/7 support for media inquiring about your game. Now, if you think that you can do it, lovely, just go ahead and do it. But if you think that you may not have the time for that, then yet again, this is where we step in, and this is our job to kind of support you with that. Imagine a different situation, though. Imagine that you do get a question from media asking, for example, do you have logos of your game in a particular format? Or do you have key art in print quality? Or can you deliver B-roll that we could feature on the website? What happens if you don't? When there's no time to prepare it, and yet again, you lose coverage. So before even start to think about talking to media, you should prepare like a regular press kit for them. And the list you're looking at the moment, this is something I normally call like a sufficient assets batch. So something you should have prepared beforehand, something to share with media before you even start to get in touch with them. Another question that followed, another thing that I asked my media friends was, what is from this particular list that they consider most useful? And first two answers are pretty obvious. So I think you would have figured out yourself that what they said was that they need pretty much screenshots and videos. But take a look at the last position on the list, something which is called fact sheet. This was the third most desirable asset by media outlets. And what it is, it's a really simple thing. Pretty much, it's just a document, 1 page, 2 pages tops, where you outline the most important information about the game. So of course you put the game title there, the name of the publisher, the name of the developer, what's the release date, what's the price, what kind of platforms the game is releasing on, what kind of gameplay modes it has, the genre, the setting, a paragraph about the plot, a paragraph about gameplay, a little bit about where to find assets and whom to contact, and a paragraph about your company. Now, you have to remember that when you send out a press release or an email, somebody's going to skip it, somebody's going to delete it. They might want to cover your game later on. And for that, fact sheet is essential because they have like all information in one place. Also, do remember when preparing it that it should be in some format which is easy to edit. So use Word, use OpenOffice, don't use PDFs because copy-paste is every journalist's best friend. So try to make their life easier and deliver them something that they could actually make a use of. Now, when you have your campaign planned and you have people assigned to run it and you have the list of assets prepared, this is the time when you can and should start pitching media about your project. First rule to remember when doing so. A lot of teams think that what sells their game is the list of features. So even when I speak to indie developers and I tell them, okay, so if I'm about to help you out, let me know something about your game. What they start with is, okay, so in our game we have that many types of weapons, and we have so many levels, and we do a pixel art game. Honestly speaking, neither do I care nor media care, because they can either check it out on screenshots, they can play the game, they can figure it out themselves. What media are looking for, though, is actually a story around your game. So instead of selling them a list of features, try to figure out a story that you could sell them. First of all, what brought you into making games in the first place? Or maybe there's something unique that you could tell. How did you come up with the idea for the game? Or maybe it's based on real-time events, or maybe it covers your personal story. Whatever it is, it's better than telling media that your game has dozen number of levels. A second thing to do would be to do your research. So remember me saying that it's very important to get the message out there, but it's also very important to make sure that you have the right audience for it. It works exactly the same when it comes to getting in touch with journalists, which means it's not so much about letting know RPS, rock, paper, shotgun, that you're doing such a game. It's more important to find the right editor at rock, paper, shotgun who could actually write about your game. So, if you're doing an endless runner, try to find somebody who already covered similar games. If you're working on RPG, find one editor that's actually covering RPGs rather than racing games. And if you are working on an indie title, don't pitch about it a journalist who's normally covering AAA games, because this won't work. If you want to be successful, you have to find somebody who's actually covering similar games to the one you are working on. And this is a tough part. To actually start a relationship with a journalist before you start pitching them. What does it mean? Try to follow them on Twitter, read their articles, comment on their stories, try to share feedback, attend as many gaming events as you can and try to meet these guys, even for the sake of shaking hand, because this is something that eventually will kind of work like, this will make you stand out from the crowd. You won't be anonymous anymore. So when the time comes that you will actually be pitching them about covering your game, they will be more likely to spend some time and reading your email rather than simply deleting it right away. Now then finally, it's time to get in touch. Always remember about one thing. Use email for professional reasons. You don't ever pitch media about your game on social media channels, especially Twitter. Media hate it, don't do it, don't try to sell your game on Twitter. Most journalists use social channels purely for fun. So unless you're permitted to do that, use email for professional communication. And finally, don't be afraid to follow up. You have to remember that the moment when you send out the press release, this is actually when the work and the job starts, not when it ends. It won't work this way. Most of the time it doesn't work this way, that you send out the message out and it gets covered immediately. Usually you have to push for it, and you have to push for it hard. So you have to be aware of the fact that usually journalists get around between 30 to 60 press releases a day. So there's no chance they're gonna go and read every one of them. So it is okay to follow up. It is okay to get back to them and say, hey, maybe there's something missing. Maybe you need something. Maybe you have a problem with something that I could help you with. Just remember not to do it too frequently. Usually it's acceptable to do it like 3 to 5 days before the initial pitch. If you do it more often, then you're most likely going to be considered as a spammer. Now, last thing to mention, whatever you do, if your game gets successful, fingers crossed for that, don't act like a celebrity. I've really seen that happen too many times in the past, where the hype was growing, the game was going successful, a couple of bigger media outlets were covering it massively, and all of a sudden, the independent developer that used to be very friendly and very open, now they decided that, okay, so we don't need to reply to every interview request unless it's from Game Informer. We don't need to deliver new assets unless it's PC Gamer asking, and we don't need to interact with any website that is lower than, I don't know, 500,000 Unix per month. Don't do that. Your game might be successful, your next one might be even more successful, but you might be not so lucky with the third one. And this is exactly the part where you're going to meet media and you're going to meet them badly. So make sure you treat them nice. Be humble, always. Thank you.